Do you believe that a corpse can come back to life just by touching the bones of a prophet? An extraordinary story recorded in the Bible but rarely mentioned, a miracle that 99% of people don't know about. Today, we will explore together one of the most remarkable miracles in the history of faith, the moment when death had to give way to life, when the power of God transcended all natural limitations. Imagine a moment when a cold, lifeless body suddenly trembles, breath returns, and life flows through the veins. Not by the hand of a doctor, not by modern technology, but simply because it touched the bones of someone who had been anointed by God. This is not fiction, not legend, but an event recorded in the Bible, a testament to the unlimited power of God. In today's world, we often get caught up in worries, difficulties that seem insurmountable. There are times when we feel like we're facing corpses in our lives, dead dreams, broken relationships, lost opportunities. But the story we're about to explore today brings a powerful message. Nothing is impossible for God, even if it means bringing the dead back to life. The story of the corpse coming back to life when touching the bones of the prophet Elisha is not just a miracle from the distant past. It's a vivid reminder of God's power still at work in today's world. It's evidence that even when everything seems to have ended, God can still bring new life, new hope, and new beginnings. As we delve into this story, I want you to open your heart, not just to understand a historical event, but to receive the message that God wants to convey to your own life today. Because the power that brought a corpse back to life when it touched the prophet's bones is still working, still waiting to transform the corpses in your life. Let's explore together this amazing story, a miracle that 99% of people don't know about, but which can change the way you view God's power and what He can do in your life. This is not just a history lesson. It's an invitation to believe in the impossible, to hope when all hope seems lost, and to believe that God still performs miracles even in today's age. Let's journey back in time together to the ancient kingdom of Israel, a land filled with turmoil and contradictions. This was the era of divided kingdoms, when Israel and Judah were separated, when kings succeeded one another in short and turbulent dynasties. Amid this chaos, God continued to send prophets to remind His people of the covenant, of loyalty, and of His love. Around the 9th century BC, the northern kingdom of Israel was experiencing one of its darkest periods. Idolatry was rampant, morality was declining, and the people were increasingly distancing themselves from the God of their ancestors. Kings like Ahab and Jehoram had led the nation down a path of sin, causing God's wrath to intensify. It was during this dark time that God raised up a special person, the prophet Elisha. His name means, God is salvation, a profound reminder of the mission entrusted to him. Elisha wasn't born into a royal or priestly lineage. He was just an ordinary farmer, plowing his field with 12 pairs of oxen, when the prophet Elijah came to him and threw his cloak over him, a symbolic act representing the passing of the prophetic mission. That fateful encounter completely transformed Elisha's life. He abandoned everything to follow Elijah, serving him as a faithful disciple. And when Elijah was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind with a chariot of fire, Elisha received a double portion of his master's spirit, a bold request that was granted. With the power bestowed upon him, Elisha began his mission. He wasn't just a prophet of warning, but one who performed many miraculous wonders. He purified poisonous water, multiplied a widow's oil to pay her debts, raised a dead child to life, and even healed Naaman, a Syrian army commander with leprosy, an enemy of Israel. The power of God flowed through Elisha so mightily that even non-believers were amazed. He wasn't just the voice of God, but also His hand, bringing both blessings and judgment. When children mocked him for his baldness, 2 bears emerged from the forest and attacked them. When the Syrian army surrounded him, God opened His servant's eyes to see the angelic armies surrounding them on the hills. But what made Elisha truly different wasn't the miracles he performed while alive, but what happened after his death. God's power remained so strong in his bones that it could raise the dead, clear evidence that Elisha's God is not limited by death. During this period, Israel was frequently attacked by neighboring nations. The Moabites, in particular, regularly invaded during spring, plundering crops and possessions from the Israelites. These attacks caused not only material damage but also created a constant fear in the hearts of the people. It was during one such invasion that a miraculous event occurred, the event we're exploring today. An Israelite man had died, and while people were preparing to bury him, they suddenly spotted a group of Moabite soldiers approaching. In panic and haste, they threw the man's body into the nearest tomb, which happened to be Elisha's. What happened next became one of the most extraordinary miracles recorded in the Bible. When the corpse touched Elisha's bones, something unimaginable occurred. The dead man suddenly trembled, breath returned to his lungs, and he stood up, alive. This miracle wasn't just a supernatural event. It carried a profound message about God's power over death, about his faithfulness to his people, even in the darkest times, and about the promise of resurrection that would later be fully fulfilled in Jesus Christ. In the context of a nation declining morally and spiritually, this miracle was a powerful reminder that God was still present, still working, and his power is not limited by death or human decay. Even when his prophet was gone, his mission wasn't over, and his message continued to echo through generations. This isn't just a story about a miracle from the distant past. It's a reminder for us today that our God is the God of life, not death. He has the power to bring back to life what has died, whether it's a lifeless body, a broken relationship, a faded dream, or a faith that's slowly diminishing. As we continue to delve into the details of this miracle, keep in mind this historical and spiritual context. Remember that this story isn't just an amazing historical event, but an invitation to believe in God's power in our own lives today. A moment when the boundary between life and death was blurred by the power of God. This story is recorded in 2 Kings 13:20-21, a short passage of scripture, but one that contains one of the most astonishing miracles. The prophet Elisha, after many years of serving God and his people, finally passed away. He was buried according to the customs of the Jews at that time in a stone tomb, not a luxurious burial chamber for kings, but a simple resting place for someone who had dedicated his entire life to God. Time passed after Elisha's death. The kingdom of Israel continued to face challenges and conflicts. In particular, the Moabites frequently attacked Israeli territory, plundering and terrorizing the people. They often chose early spring to invade, when crops were beginning to ripen and people were preparing to harvest. On such a day, a funeral was taking place in Israel. A man had just died, and his family was conducting the burial ceremony. The Bible doesn't tell us much about this man, who he was, how he had lived, or the cause of his death. Perhaps that's not as important as what was about to happen. As the funeral was proceeding, suddenly there were shouts of alarm. A group of Moabite soldiers was approaching. In panic, the mourners didn't have time to complete the burial properly. They needed to quickly find a place to put the body and flee from the approaching enemy. In that emergency situation, they saw a nearby tomb, Elisha's tomb. With no other choice, they hurriedly opened the tomb door and threw the man's body inside. This wasn't an act of disrespect, but a hasty decision in a dangerous situation. Afterward, they quickly closed the tomb door and fled from the Moabite soldiers. And then, something unimaginable happened. The Bible describes it simply yet powerfully. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood up. Let's pause for a moment and imagine that scene. In the darkness of the tomb, a cold, lifeless body suddenly comes into contact with the bones of the deceased prophet. No prayer was uttered, no ritual was performed, no one was present to witness it. Just the simple contact between death and what remained of a man who had been anointed by God. And then, a supernatural power suddenly flows. Perhaps it began as a slight tremor, a weak breath, a first heartbeat. After it had stopped beating, blood begins to circulate again in the frozen veins. Paralyzed muscles begin to contract and relax. And then, in a miraculous moment, the dead man suddenly opens his eyes, takes a deep breath, and stands up, completely alive. The Bible doesn't tell us what happened next. What did the man do after coming back to life? How did he react when he realized he was in a tomb? How did he recount his experience? These questions remain unanswered, perhaps because the focus of the story is not on that man, but on the power of God manifested through Elisha's bones. What's amazing is that this miracle didn't happen because Elisha performed it. He was already dead. It wasn't because another prophet prayed. It wasn't due to any religious ritual. It was simply due to contact with the bones of someone who had been anointed by God. This shows that God's power is not limited by human death. Even when his servant had passed away, his power was still present. This miracle is even more special when we recall that Elisha had once asked for a double portion of the spirit of his master Elijah. And indeed, throughout his career, Elisha performed twice as many miracles as Elijah. But what's interesting is that Elijah was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, not experiencing death, while Elisha died and was buried. However, even after death, his bones still carried the power to raise the dead, a miracle that even Elijah had never performed while alive. Those who witnessed this miracle must have been utterly amazed. Imagine their reaction when they saw the man they had just buried suddenly appear, alive and well. Perhaps at first they were afraid, thinking it was a ghost. But then they realized this wasn't an illusion or hallucination. The man had truly come back to life. News of this miracle must have spread quickly throughout the community. In a society that was gradually moving away from God, this was a powerful reminder that he was still present, still working, and his power far exceeds human understanding. This wasn't just a miracle for the man who was brought back to life, but also a sign for the entire nation of Israel that their God is the God of life, not death. This miracle also carries a profound prophetic significance. It foreshadowed a greater miracle that would occur many centuries later, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If God could cause a dead man to come back to life just by touching the bones of a prophet, then he certainly could raise his son from the dead, defeating the power of death once and for all. In today's world, with science and technology having advanced tremendously, we might easily overlook miracles like this, considering them merely as myths or symbols. But for believers, these are real historical events, evidence of God's unlimited power, a power that is not limited by natural laws, not bound by time and space, and especially not defeated by death. The miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones reminds us that nothing is impossible for God. Even when all hope seems lost, even when death seems to have won, God can still bring new life, new hope, and new beginnings. This is a message that all of us need to hear, especially in times of difficulty and challenge. The miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones is not just an astonishing supernatural event, but also contains profound spiritual meanings, valuable lessons for our faith today. Let's explore together the spiritual depths hidden behind this remarkable story. First and foremost, this miracle is a powerful symbol of life's victory over death. In the world we live in, death is often viewed as the irreversible endpoint. It represents finality, loss, and sometimes despair. But through this miracle, God demonstrated that his power transcends all natural limitations, including the boundary between life and death. When the corpse touched Elisha's bones and came back to life, it was a powerful declaration that God holds authority over life and death. He is the life giver, and only he can restore life that has been lost. This reminds us that no situation is too desperate for God, no loss too great for him to restore, no ending is permanent when God decides to intervene. In the Bible, resurrection has always been a symbol of hope. It reminds us that death is not the final chapter, but merely a transitional phase. This miracle foreshadows the greatest resurrection in history, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who would defeat the power of death once and for all. The second noteworthy aspect is that this miracle shows the power of someone anointed by God remains present even after they have passed away. Elisha was no longer alive to perform this miracle. He had died, and only his bones remained. Yet, God's power was still present in what remained of him, strong enough to bring a dead man back to life. This teaches us that when God anoints someone, their influence doesn't end when they pass away. Their spiritual legacy continues to impact future generations. We see this through the prophets, the apostles, and believers throughout the ages. Their testimony, their faith, and their example continue to inspire and change the lives of others, even after they have departed from this world. Consider this. Elisha had asked for a double portion of the spirit of his master, Elijah, and he received it. Throughout his career, he performed many miracles, but his final and perhaps greatest miracle occurred after his death. This reminds us that God can use us in ways we cannot imagine, even when we are no longer present. The third aspect of this miracle is a profound lesson about faith. In today's world, we often get caught up in what can be seen, measured, and proven. We place our trust in science, technology, and what seems reasonable. But this miracle challenges us to believe in the impossible, to trust in God's power beyond all limitations of logic and nature. Imagine the reaction of those who witnessed this miracle. They saw a dead man come back to life just by touching the bones of a prophet. This must have shaken the foundations of their worldview. It forced them to confront the reality that there are powers far beyond human understanding, that their God is not limited by what humans consider possible. In our lives, we often face situations that seem insurmountable, illnesses that cannot be cured, relationships that cannot be mended, problems that cannot be solved. But this miracle reminds us that with God, all things are possible. He can do things far beyond our understanding and imagination. Faith is not about believing in what we can see or understand. It's about trusting God even when we cannot see or understand. The miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones is an invitation to enter into a deeper faith, a faith not limited by what seems reasonable or possible. Another important aspect of this miracle is that it emphasizes the importance of contact with the divine. The dead man did not come back to life just by being near Elisha's tomb. He came back to life because he touched the prophet's bones. This direct contact was the determining factor that led to the miracle. In our spiritual lives, contact with God is equally important. It's not enough to just know about God, read about Him, or hear about Him. We need a personal, direct relationship with Him. We need to touch Him through prayer, worship, and meditation on His Word. In today's digital age, we can easily fall into the trap of only knowing about God without truly knowing Him. We can read about Him, hear about Him, even talk about Him, but still lack that personal, direct connection with Him. When we truly connect with God, His power flows into our lives, bringing life to the dead parts within us, hope that has been extinguished, joy that has been lost, relationships that have been broken. Just as the dead man was restored when he touched Elisha's bones, we too are restored when we touch God. Finally, this miracle carries a powerful message about hope and restoration. In a world filled with suffering, loss, and despair, we need reminders that no situation is too desperate for God. He can restore what seems lost, heal what seems broken, and bring life to what seems dead. The miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones is evidence of God's restorative power. It reminds us that nothing is beyond His reach. No one is too far for Him to touch. No situation is too desperate for Him to change. In our lives, we often face corpses, dead dreams, broken relationships, extinguished hopes. But this miracle reminds us that God can bring life to those corpses. He can restore what seems lost, heal what seems broken, and bring hope to situations that seem hopeless. When we face challenges and difficulties in life, let's remember this miracle. Let's remember that our God is the God of life, not death. He is the God of hope, not despair. He is the God of restoration, not permanent loss. The miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones is not just a story from the past, it's a promise for the future. It reminds us that God is still working, still performing miracles, and still bringing life to what has died. And that gives us hope, no matter what challenges we face in life. The miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones is not an isolated phenomenon in the Bible. Throughout biblical history, God has repeatedly demonstrated his power over death through various miracles. Let's explore similar miracles and understand the consistent message God wants to convey to us. When we think about miracles involving raising the dead, many people immediately recall the story of Jesus raising Lazarus, recorded in John chapter 11. Lazarus, a close friend of Jesus, had died and been buried for 4 days before Jesus arrived. By then, Lazarus's body had already begun to decompose, as his sister Martha noted, "Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." The similarity between this miracle and the one involving Elisha's bones is that both demonstrate God's power, transcending the boundary of death. However, there are notable differences. In Lazarus's case, Jesus deliberately delayed his visit so that the miracle could take place, revealing God's glory. He stood before the tomb and called Lazarus to come out. This was a deliberate, purposeful action. In contrast, the miracle related to Elisha's bones happened accidentally, without direct human intervention. No one prayed, no one called the dead to rise. It was simply due to contact with the prophet's bones. This shows that God's power can work even without active human participation. Another similar miracle is recorded in 1 Kings chapter 17, when the prophet Elijah raised the widow of Zarephath's son. The child had died, and the grieving mother blamed Elijah, saying he had come to expose her sin and cause her son's death. Elijah took the child to his upper room where he was staying, placed him on his bed, and called upon the Lord. He stretched himself upon the child 3 times and prayed, "O Lord my God, I pray, let this child's soul come back to him." God answered Elijah's prayer, and the child came back to life. Interestingly, Elisha, Elijah's successor, performed a similar miracle in 2 Kings chapter 4. He raised the son of the Shunammite woman by lying on the child, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. The child's body gradually warmed up, and eventually he sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. These miracles show a consistent pattern. God empowers his prophets to overcome death. But what's remarkable about the miracle involving Elisha's bones is that it occurred after the prophet had died. God's power was still present in his bones, showing that the influence of someone anointed by God can transcend even death. In the New Testament, we see Jesus not only raising Lazarus but performing several similar miracles. He raised Jairus' daughter, Mark 5:21-43, a young girl who had just died. When Jesus arrived at Jairus' house, people were already mourning loudly. He told them the child was not dead but sleeping. They ridiculed him, but Jesus took the girl's hand and said, "Talitha kumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk. Another miracle is recorded in Luke chapter 7, when Jesus raised the son of a widow in the town of Nain. A funeral procession was carrying the body of the widow's only son out of the city for burial. When Jesus saw the mother, he was moved with compassion and said, "Do not weep." Then he touched the coffin and said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. After Jesus ascended to heaven, his apostles were also empowered to perform similar miracles. In Acts chapter 9, we read about Peter raising a woman named Tabitha, or Dorcas. She was a disciple full of good works and acts of charity. When she died, the disciples sent for Peter. He came, knelt down and prayed, then turned to the body and said, "Tabitha, arise." She opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. Similarly, in Acts chapter 20, Paul raised a young man named Eutychus. This young man had fallen asleep and fallen from a third-story window to the ground, dying instantly. Paul went down, embraced him, and said, "Do not be troubled, for his life is in him." And indeed, Eutychus came back to life. What's noteworthy is that all these miracles carry a consistent message. God's power conquers death. From the Old Testament to the New Testament, from the prophets to Jesus and the apostles, this message is emphasized repeatedly. God is the life giver, and he has the power to restore life that has been lost. However, all these miracles are just shadows, foreshadowing the greatest miracle in history, the resurrection of Jesus Christ himself. Unlike those who were raised in the stories above, who would eventually face death again, Jesus rose with a glorified body, never to die again. His resurrection marks the final and complete victory over the power of death. Jesus' resurrection isn't just a miracle, it's the foundation of Christian faith. As Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 15:14, "And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, and your faith is in vain." Jesus' resurrection is proof that he has defeated sin and death, and it's a promise that all who believe in him will also be raised to live eternally with him. When we look back at the miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones, we see it as part of the bigger picture of God's power over life and death. It reminds us that our God is the God of life, not death. He has the power to bring back to life what has died, and he has demonstrated this repeatedly throughout biblical history. These miracles aren't just stories from the past, they're promises for the future. They remind us that one day all who believe in Jesus will be raised with glorified bodies, never to face death again. As Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." John 11:25-26. The miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones is not just a historical story from the distant past. It carries profound lessons, spiritual principles that can be applied to our modern lives today. Let's explore together how we can live according to these principles in our turbulent 21st century world. First, this story teaches us about the power of perseverance in faith. In today's age, we are living in a constantly changing society where values, trends, and beliefs seem to always be in flux. Many people find it difficult to maintain their faith amid the pressures of modern life. Work, family responsibilities, financial worries, and countless other stress factors can make us feel exhausted and doubtful. But the story of Elisha's bones reminds us that true faith is not something easily shaken by circumstances. Even after death, God's power remained present in Elisha's bones. Similarly, genuine faith doesn't depend on temporary emotions or favorable circumstances. It takes root deep in our souls, remaining steadfast even when facing the greatest challenges. When you feel your faith being tested, remember that the God of Elisha doesn't change. He is still the God of miracles, who can do things far beyond our understanding. Persevere in faith even when everything seems impossible. Believe in the impossible in your life, whether it's healing for a broken relationship, a dream that seems dead, or a situation that seems hopeless. A woman shared her story about how she persistently prayed for her unbelieving husband for 25 years. There were times when she wanted to give up, feeling like her prayers were just hitting a brass wall. But she persevered, and after a quarter of a century, her husband opened his heart to the Lord. Like the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones, her steadfast faith brought new life to her husband's soul. The second aspect we can apply from this story is the power of contact with the divine. In the modern world, we are surrounded by countless noises and distractions. Smartphones, social media, 24/7 news, and countless demands vying for our attention. Amid all these things, connecting with God can become difficult. The corpse in our story didn't come back to life just by being near Elisha's tomb. It came back to life because it touched the prophet's bones. This direct contact was the decisive factor leading to the miracle. Similarly, in our spiritual lives, contact with God is essential. In the digital age, we can easily fall into the trap of only knowing about God without truly knowing Him. We can read about Him, hear about Him, even talk about Him, but still lack that personal, direct connection with Him. We need to touch Him through sincere prayer, heartfelt worship, and deep meditation on His Word. A busy businessman shared that he always felt his spiritual life was dry until he began dedicating 30 minutes each morning to touch God, not just hastily reading the Bible, but truly meditating on God's Word, listening to His voice, and sharing his heart with Him. The change in his life was remarkable. He sensed God's presence in every aspect of life, and his decisions began to reflect God's wisdom rather than just human logic. In today's modern world, we need to create sacred spaces, moments separated from the noise of life, to truly connect with God. When we do this, His power flows into our lives, bringing life to the dead parts within us, extinguished hope, lost joy, broken relationships. The third aspect we can apply is the message of hope and restoration. In today's world, many people are struggling with feelings of despair. From personal challenges like illness, loss, and failure, to global issues like climate change, political instability, and social injustice, it's easy to feel like everything is falling apart. But the miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones reminds us that no situation is too desperate for God. He can bring life to what has died, hope to seemingly hopeless situations, and light to the darkest places. A small community in a rural area faced prolonged drought, causing many farmers to lose their livelihoods and the entire village to fall into despair. Instead of surrendering, they gathered together, prayed, and began seeking creative solutions. They developed new farming methods, built rainwater collection systems, and supported each other. Not only did they overcome the drought, but they also developed a stronger, more united community with better resilience to future challenges. From the death of the old way of life, something new and better was born. In our lives, we often face corpses, dead dreams, broken relationships, extinguished hopes. But this miracle reminds us that God can bring life to those corpses. He can restore what seems lost, heal what seems broken, and bring hope to situations that seem hopeless. Another practical application from this story is awareness of our influence. Elisha was no longer alive to witness the final miracle that occurred through his bones. However, God's power was still present in what remained of him, strong enough to bring a dead man back to life. This teaches us that our influence can extend far beyond our lifetime. What we do, the values we live by, and the faith we demonstrate can continue to impact others even after we're gone. This is a powerful reminder of our responsibility to live a meaningful life and positively impact the world around us. A teacher dedicated 40 years of her life to teaching at a poor school. She never became rich or famous, but she invested in the lives of thousands of students. Many years after she passed away, her students, now successful adults, still mentioned her as the person who changed their lives. Her influence continued, like the power in Elisha's bones. Finally, this story reminds us of the promise of resurrection. In the modern world, death remains an inevitable reality that we all must face. Despite advances in science and medicine, we still cannot escape the truth that life on this earth is temporary. The miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones is a reminder that death is not the final end. It foreshadows the greatest miracle in history, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who defeated the power of death once and for all, and through his resurrection, we have the promise of our own resurrection. For believers, this brings hope that overcomes the fear of death. It gives us courage to live fully, knowing that this life is not all we have. It gives us strength to face losses and sorrows, knowing that separation is only temporary. A man lost his beloved wife after 50 years together. At the funeral, instead of being immersed in grief, he shared about his hope. "I'm not saying goodbye," he said. "I'm just saying, see you later. Death is not a period. It's just a comma in our story." The hope of resurrection gave him strength and peace, even in his deepest pain. As we apply these lessons from this miracle to modern life, we are invited to live with steadfast faith, deep connection with God, unwavering hope, awareness of our influence, and belief in the promise of resurrection. These are not abstract concepts, but practical principles that can guide us through the challenges and opportunities of modern life. The journey of exploring the miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones has taken us through many dimensions of heavenly power. From the turbulent historical context of the ancient kingdom of Israel to the miraculous moment when life returned to a cold corpse, we have witnessed one of the most powerful demonstrations of God's unlimited power. This miracle is not merely an astonishing supernatural event. It is a powerful declaration that God holds supreme authority over life and death. When the corpse touched Elisha's bones and suddenly came back to life, the boundary between life and death was erased. This is a message of hope echoing throughout the ages. No situation is too desperate. No ending is permanent when God decides to intervene. In today's world, when we face challenges that seem insurmountable, remember this miracle. Perhaps you are facing a serious illness, a broken relationship, a career on the verge of collapse, or a dream that seems to have died. But the God of Elisha is still our God today. He still has the power to bring back to life what has died. Consider this: God's power is not limited by human death. Even after Elisha had passed away, God's power was still present in his bones. This reminds us that the influence of someone anointed by God can extend far beyond their lifetime. What we do, the values we live by, and the faith we demonstrate can continue to impact others even after we are gone. This miracle also teaches us about the importance of contact with the divine. The corpse didn't come back to life just by being near Elisha's tomb. It came back to life because it touched the prophet's bones. In our spiritual lives, contact with God is equally important. It's not enough to just know about God, read about Him, or hear about Him. We need a personal, direct relationship with Him. Looking back at similar miracles in the Bible, from Elijah raising the widow's son at Zarephath to Jesus calling Lazarus out of the tomb, we see a consistent message: God is the life giver, and He has the power to restore life that has been lost. But all these miracles are just shadows, foreshadowing the greatest miracle in history, the resurrection of Jesus Christ Himself. The resurrection of Jesus is not just a miracle. It is the foundation of Christian faith. It is evidence that He has defeated sin and death, and it is a promise that all who believe in Him will also be raised to live eternally with Him. As Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." John 11:25-26. So how can we apply these lessons from this miracle to our daily lives? First, persevere in faith, even when everything seems impossible. Believe in the impossible in your life. Second, seek deep contact with God through prayer, worship, and meditation on His Word. Third, remember that no situation is too desperate for God. He can bring life to what has died, hope to seemingly hopeless situations, and light to the darkest places. As we conclude our exploration of this miracle, I want to challenge you. Look at your life and identify the corpses, dead dreams, broken relationships, extinguished hopes. Bring those corpses to God and believe that He can bring life to them. Pray with faith, not with doubt. Declare God's word over seemingly hopeless situations. And wait with hope, knowing that our God is the God of miracles. The miracle of the corpse coming back to life when touching Elisha's bones is not just a story from the past. It is an invitation to live a life full of faith, hope, and power in the present. It reminds us that the God of Elisha is still our God today, and his power can still transform our lives in ways we cannot imagine. Walk in faith, with the certainty that God can and will do things far beyond our understanding. Live with hope, knowing that no situation is too desperate for him. And share this message with those around you, so they too may know about the unlimited power of God, the power that brought a corpse back to life when it touched the prophet's bones, and the power that is still at work in the world today. Thank you for joining us on this journey of exploring this wonderful miracle. Remember, with God, all things are possible. Nothing is too difficult for him, and no one is too far for him to reach. May God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and give you peace. God bless you.